Hey, what's up guys, welcome back to Axelis. Today we are going to be seeing what if Naruto fell in love with Femme Gaara Part 2. Naruto breathed a sigh of relief as Sasuke stood over the unconscious body of Yoroi Ikado. The Uchiha had won. It had been far more difficult than it should have been, but Sasuke had been victorious all the same. The source of his struggles was hardly Yoroi himself. Sasuke had been forced to battle against his own body for much of the match, as the mark on his neck had threatened to overtake him repeatedly. Despite the ailment, he had gutted his way through to a brutal finishing sequence of his foe. Yoroi Ikado is unable to continue. The winner is Sasuke Uchiha. Genma announced from the floor of the enormous room. Sakura and Naruto both cheered from the stands as their teammate hobbled towards the stairs. Unfortunately, he collapsed before he could make it even 3 steps up. The instant he fell, Kakashi was there to catch and support him. The pair then disappeared just as they had the previous night. What was all that about? Sakura wondered aloud. Naruto frowned and drummed his fingers on the railing of the observation deck. The mark on his neck. Kakashi-sensei took him away last night to deal with it, but I think Sasuke convinced him to leave it be. Seems like that was a mistake, he hypothesized. There was then a brief intermission as Yoroi's unconscious form was carried from the makeshift battlefield. In that time, Naruto's mind wandered. This whole thing is meant to be stressful, that's the point, but man, this has been brutal. They wake us up at 6 in the morning, drag us in here, and then start drawing names, he thought to himself tiredly. A look at the genin around him revealed a similar sentiment towards the rigorous schedule of the exam. They were all weary, with a variety of cuts and bruises on their faces. Except one. Gaara stood off in the far right corner of the observation deck without a mark on her face, save for the black circles under her eyes. The blonde narrowed his eyes as he studied the redhead. She was certainly disheveled looking, as her hair was unkempt and she wore no makeup, but there was a connectedness about her entire demeanor and appearance. As though everything were in its place. Perhaps it was the easy composure with which she assessed the world around her, or the ruthlessness she was capable of unveiling at the drop of a hat, but Gaara of the desert utterly terrified Naruto. Luckily for the Jinchuriki of Konoha, the intermission ended before he could fall further into the trance of deciphering the puzzle of the sand kunoichi. Listen up, all of you. There's been a change in how these preliminary matches are going to work. For one of you, at least, Genma said loudly, catching the attention of the group of genin in an instant. Once it was clear that he was the center of focus, the proctor elaborated. We've ended up with an odd number of contestants, which means that one of you is left out in the cold without a dance partner. To solve that problem, we've decided that one of you is going to have the privilege of fighting twice, he explained, eliciting an uncomfortable shift from the group of young ninja. Take a look up at the board, Genma ordered. The genin did as they were told and turned their attention to the large randomizer on the wall, which was spinning rapidly. After a few moments, it stopped. Oh god damn it. Naruto cursed as his name and picture flashed on the dim screen. Genma chuckled and shot the blonde a look of veiled sympathy. Lucky you, Naruto. You get to fight twice, he announced. The Jinchuriki grumbled a bit before asking a pertinent question. What if I lose my first fight? He asked pointedly. The proctor shrugged his shoulders and yawned. You get another shot in the form of your second fight. That's your incentive for doing this, though there are still risks. If you win both fights, you move on without consequence. If you lose your first and win your second, you still move on. But, if you win your first and lose your second, you don't move on, he explained. The blonde thought for a moment, eventually coming to the conclusion that the terms were reasonable. Fine. Now let's get on with this, he said impatiently. Genma nodded and signaled for the board to randomize itself again. The first pair of names to appear were Kankuro of the Desert and Misumi Tsurugi. The match ended fairly quickly, with Kankuro, who was a puppeteer, brutalizing the unfortunate genin with a savage display of puppeting prowess. The next match was a tad more interesting, with Sakura and Ino battering each other to a draw. "That was messy," Naruto muttered as both girls were carried up the stairs by medical staff. Neither had sustained major damage, other than a minor concussion in both their cases. Without waiting for either girl to awaken, Genma set the board again. This time, the names that appeared were Temari of the Desert and Tenten. "She's one of the people who was with Gaara in the forest," Naruto thought to himself as the combatants made their way down the stairs and towards Genma to receive their instructions. The blonde then briefly recalled the brutality with which Kankuro, another member of the Sand Village's cell, ended his foe's prospects of becoming a Chunin and shuddered. Before he could ponder the incoming savagery any further, Genma ordered the pair of kunoichi to assume their positions to begin the match. "Now, if you're both ready, you may begin," the proctor yelled. Tenten, being a user of weapons and projectiles, immediately launched a series of kunai and shuriken at Temari. Despite the maelstrom of weaponry flying in her direction, the sand kunoichi did not move from her spot. Instead, she simply flicked open the fan on her back for a split second. Somehow, the subtle movement sent all of the projectiles flying in the opposite direction. Tenten was able to avoid the reflected kunai, but the evasive maneuver had forced her backwards several feet. How's she doing that? Naruto wondered to himself as Temari deflected another barrage of projectiles with one simple twitch of her fan. After another 5 minutes of effortless defensive goading from Temari, Naruto got his answer. Seemingly bored of playing with her food, the fan wielder fully opened her fan for the first time. She then whipped it around and launched a massive wave of serrated wind at her opponent. The miniature hurricane instantly ripped Tenten from the ground and suspended her high up in the air. A collective gasp of awe, and even a bit of horror, was drawn from the observing genin as Temari's wind mercilessly tore into Tenten's body. Cuts were appearing on her body with a quickness as she was strung up in the air against her will, and the wind didn't seem close to subsiding. After an uncomfortable stretch of what essentially amounted to extended torture, Temari's wind jutsu fizzled out. Tenten dropped from the air towards the ground at alarming speed, seemingly bound to be splattered on the stone flooring. "She's going to die," Naruto thought urgently. Just as the thought crossed his mind, Tenten was prevented from hitting the floor by Temari, although in incredibly cruel and brutal fashion. Instead of opting to let her foe fall to the ground, the sand kunoichi closed her steel fan and stuck it out in front of her. Tenten then landed on the butt of the metal fan back first with a sickening thud. Temari then tossed her unconscious body away. Before the kunoichi's body could hit the floor, she was scooped up by Rock Lee, a teammate of hers. There was a brief trading of verbal barbs between the genin, but they were quickly broken up by Genma. Once the festivities were over, Temari made her way up the stairs and swiftly returned to her team with a smug grin on her face. Naruto's hands curled into fists at the sight of her. "Cruel bitch. You'll get yours someday," he thought to himself rigidly. As with his fearful assessment of Gaara, however, the blonde was afforded little time to ponder the ruthlessness of Temari. The next matchup quickly appeared on the board and interrupted his thoughts. Shikamaru and Nara will now face Kintsuchi, Genma announced loudly. Shikamaru, who was standing a few paces to Naruto's left, sighed heavily and shoved his hands in his pockets. The Nara then plodded dejectedly towards the stairs to participate in his match. Once both he and the sound kunoichi were before Genma, the proctor called for the match to begin. What ensued was a hilariously apathetic and tepid performance from Shikamaru in which he spent nearly 5 full minutes simply plucking needles out of his arms and legs before seeming to consciously decide to win. Once he did so, he linked his shadow to Kin's and forced her to slam the back of her head into the concrete wall of the room. The impact knocked her out cold, awarding Shikamaru simultaneously thrilling and anticlimactic victory. As Kin's body was carried away by medical staff, the board shuffled once again. This time, the results were meaningful. From Naruto's perspective, at least. Naruto Uzumaki will now face Kiba Inuzuka. The slightest hint of interest flashed across Gaara's unresponsive features as Konoha's most audible genin made his way down the stairs of the observation deck to face Kiba. The preliminary round had been exceptionally dull, and virtually nothing interesting had occurred. Those who were expected to win won, and those who were expected to lose were defeated. Predictability was the theme, and no one genin had done anything to change that narrative. You know, other than the fact that I actually recognized the name Inuzuka, I don't know a thing about either one of these two-inch. Temari commented as Kiba and Naruto faced one another and received a rundown of the rule set they would be competing under. Kankuro nodded in agreement. Yeah, that's true. I think the clan name is enough for me to pick Kiba, or whatever his name is, to win this, he said. Gaara, much to the surprise of her siblings, spoke up. I'll play devil's advocate. Naruto will win within 10 minutes, she proclaimed calmly. Temari raised an eyebrow at the prediction and gave her sister an odd look. What makes you say that? She asked skeptically, conscious of her tone so as to not aggravate the redhead. Gaara rested her elbows on the railing and tucked a strand of crimson hair behind her left ear. Clan recognition or not, Inuzuka-san has no business facing off against a being like Naruto, she said vaguely. Before either her brother or sister could question her further, Gima's voice broke the silence in the room. Begin. He ordered Naruto and Kiba. The early stages of the match were not confidence-building for those favoring or rooting for the blonde. Kiba, alongside his ninken named Akamaru, battered Naruto pillar to post. For every punch the excitable genin landed, he was hit with 3 in return, often from both directions. This pattern lasted for nearly 3 full minutes. Are you sure he's going to win? Kankuro asked as Naruto was doubled over by a driving knee to his midsection. Gaara, whose facial expression had not changed one bit since the beginning of the fight, simply nodded. Yes, she said shortly. As the puppeteer opened his mouth to protest, Naruto realized his first major moment of success. As Kiba charged forward to strike him, the blonde planted his feet and swung a wild right-handed punch. The strike connected squarely on the Inuzuka boy's jaw and wobbled his knees. Naruto then followed up by kicking aside Akamaru, who had transformed into a copy of Kiba via a strange jutsu. Kid's got some serious fight in him, that's for sure, Temari said with an approving nod as Naruto made a hand sign. A horde of clones then appeared in the arena, nearly 50 in number. From that point onward, it was a brawl. Kiba and Akamaru were able to defeat nearly 30 before the ninken was forced to revert to his form as a simple puppy. The fall of Akamaru instantly turned the tide in Naruto's favor, as Kiba seemed to prioritize the safety of his dog over his own victory. This fight is over, Gaara said bluntly as Naruto's clones assaulted Kiba from all directions. Her bold statement was proven prescient less than a minute later when the blonde's doppelgangers launched Kiba high into the air before spiking him back into the floor. The impact made Kankuro and Temari flinch. Jeez. He mauled him once the ninken dropped. That was a thrashing, Temari said with a whistle. Genma, who looked as surprised as the fan wielder was, checked Kiba's body for a moment before shaking his head and opening his mouth to announce the victor. Kiba Inuzuka is unconscious. The winner is Naruto Uzumaki, he stated. The blonde remained down on the floor for a few moments, seemingly to make sure that Kiba wasn't severely injured as he was tended to by the medical staff. Once the health of both Kiba and Akamaru was assured, he turned and began his trek up the stairs. Gaara followed him with her eyes as he stepped up onto the observation deck and leaned on the railing for support. Despite having won decisively, Naruto wore the memories of the match on his face. His cheek was leaking blood from a gash underneath his left eye, and his jaw was colored black and blue from the punches he had absorbed. Gaara took note of his injuries and glanced back at the board on the wall, which was shuffling once again. After a few moments of waiting, the board stopped shuffling. Interestingly enough, the names that had appeared shared a common feature. Hinata Hyuga will now face Neji Hyuga. Naruto clenched his jaw and tightly gripped the railing as he looked on helplessly. A mismatch was raging below, and it was becoming difficult to watch. Hinata, despite a valiant effort, had been comprehensively brutalized for the better part of 7 minutes by Neji. Every exchange favored the elder of the two Hyuga, and the clashes were becoming more and more one-sided. Just finish her off already. You could have done it 2 minutes ago, Naruto growled as he fumed at Neji's cruel extension of a match well under his control. Unfortunately, the blonde didn't get his wish. For several more cruel minutes, Hinata was knocked around the metaphorical ring by whatever technique Neji felt like employing. Eventually, and mercifully, the branch Hyuga struck her in the chest with his palm, sending a spew of blood from her mouth and dropping her to her knees. At this, Gima stepped between the combatants and waved off the match. That went on for way too long, the blonde lamented angrily as Neji stood proudly over his crippled cousin. The look of shameless satisfaction on his face elicited a burning rage from Naruto. Before either Sakura or Kakashi could stop him, the excitable genin leapt over the edge of the railing and down to the ground. He landed roughly 20 feet from Neji, who cast him a sideways glance. The boys stared at one another silently for several moments before the tense stretch of soundlessness was broken. "Have something to say?" the Hyuga asked confrontationally. Naruto took a step forward and narrowed his eyes. "You took that way too far." "She was done 5 minutes in," he hissed. Neji raised an eyebrow and chuckled. "And what does it mean to you?" "To my knowledge, the two of you haven't spoken before," he asked. The blonde shook his head and threw up his hands in frustration. "It doesn't matter. That was cruel and uncalled for. I don't need to be close to her to have an issue with it," he yelled angrily. The Hyuga boy smirked insensitively. "Well, unfortunately for you, there isn't a thing you can do about it. What's done is done," he said coldly before turning around and briskly walking away. The blonde stared him down as he walked up the stairs. "Pompous asshole," he thought to himself as he made his own way towards the stairs. Before returning to the observation deck, however, he briefly stopped in front of the barely conscious Hinata. "You did a good job. Whether you think so or not," he assured her quietly before trudging up the stairs and rejoining his team. Kakashi put a hand on his shoulder and sighed. "Don't let him get to you, Naruto. You'll get your chance," he said. The Jinchuriki shook the hand from his shoulder and wiped at his still bleeding cheek. "Damn right I will, and when I do, he's going to wish he'd never been born," he said stiffly. The silver-haired Jonin pursed his lips and shifted his feet a bit. "I know how you feel, kid." Gaara frowned as she struggled to process the event that had just occurred down below. Naruto had, according to the words the redhead had managed to hear clearly, argued in favor of a girl he had not once spoken to for any meaningful length of time. No personal connection, no incentive to intervene, nothing. After trying and failing to find answers to the questions swirling in her mind, Gaara sighed and gave up. "I'll never understand it," she thought to herself in frustration. Her inner struggle was somewhat short-lived, as Genma cleared his throat immediately after the thought had crossed her mind. "Alright, we're down to the last 2 matches. There are only 3 people who haven't fought yet, those being Gaara of the Desert, Rock Lee, and Shino Aburame. Whoever's name doesn't appear on the board for the next match will face Naruto." "Got that?" he asked the 3 ninja in question. Gaara, Shino, and Lee all gave a collective nod and looked to the randomizing board. The machine shuffled for around 15 seconds before settling on 2 names. "Looks like you're up," Kankuro said to his sister as her name flashed on the board alongside Rock Lee's name. Gaara nodded and stretched. She then turned and began to walk towards the stairs. She, unlike Lee, who was somehow already present by Ginma, walked slowly. Every step she took seemed to echo through the large stone room like a mountaineer call in the hills. Her slow pace eventually brought her parallel to Naruto. As she passed him, without thinking, she reached out, brushed his bloody cheek with her fingers, and collected a bit of plasma without even bothering to look at him as she did so. She then sampled the blood on her fingertips with her tongue. The metallic taste caused a smirk to spread across her lips. "You will be fed soon, mother." Alright, that's it for today's video guys. Let me know how was the story down in the comment section. Also don't forget to like, share and subscribe. I'll catch you in another video. Peace.